Salt and Sacrifice may be the sequel to Salt and Sanctuary, but this game feels like 2 steps forward and 3 steps back in terms of its design. Of all the kind of 2D Souls-likes that we saw over the past decade, Salt and Sanctuary was one of the better takes, combining Metroidvania progression with a more, slower pace of its combat system to deliver a challenging take on that design. With Salt and Sacrifice, however, the developers have shifted things in several directions that I don't think works as well as it may have done on paper. But our story is that instead of facing a lifetime in prison, we become an inquisitor to go hunt mages in the mysterious realm. And as per Souls-like rules, we get killed within about 45 seconds of our first mission. And so our quest begins in order to break the curse that we have, is to, well, kill lots and lots of mages. Now, the first game was definitely open-ish style or non-linear Metroidvania, with progression locked to getting various brands, which act as your Metroidvania upgrades, giving you the ability to wall jump, use various mechanics, and so on and so forth. With Salt and Sacrifice, you start with pretty much all your movement tech in place. You now pick up Inquisitor tools, which are then used to give you some basic light, key opening or lock opening mechanics, such as being able to use air gusts, activate certain switches, etc. Now, the biggest changes to the formula definitely come with how progression and world design are set up. In the first game, as I said, this was non-linear, with the world being massive. There were few and far warp points that you could set up. In Salt and Sacrifice, there are none. Instead, you have 5 biomes, each one is independent from one another that you warp to from the game's central hub. The central hub replaces the whole faction-based system, which was interesting but also really confusing from the first game. Instead, your hub will act as your ability to restock, buy basic gear, upgrade, and do crafting that I will come back to in a second. Each one of the game's biomes is unique with its own set of environmental hazards, enemies, and the game's new progression in the form of mage doors. You see, in order to access more of each area, you need to go and consume the hearts of the named mages. So progression is like this. You enter a new area, you explore looking for a mage point. When you activate it, the mage will spawn in the level, and you will now have to track them down and fight them. This is where Salt and Sacrifice, in a weird twist, turns into Monster Hunter, as the mages will roam the level at random. Each mage has a preset ability or set of attacks, as well as summons of various tiers. And yes, those summons will interact with the other enemies. In a very hilarious point, mages will fight other mages, and if you're not careful, or if you try to do it, you can have a mage join you for a mage boss fight, and let them just fight each other while you just sit back and enjoy some popcorn. Now, when you do enough damage to a mage in the level, they will warp to a set spot, and that's when the boss fight begins proper. If you are killed in any time during the hunting of the mage, their health will not regenerate. It will only go to a preset point when you get to the boss fight. Now, the game does feature set bosses that aren't mages, that are typically gates throughout each level. But your main focus in this game is going to be fighting the mages. Kill a named mage, they will drop various bits and MacGuffins that you can then use to craft gear. Another major point, again keeping with the Monster Hunter theme, all the major gear in this game must be crafted from the parts of the different mages. As you get into the later areas, you'll find higher tier gear, and as with the first game, you have the massive skill or perk tree that will unlock gear from levels 1 to 5. Obviously, higher number, better gear. So, all in all, the change in the progression definitely gives Salt and Sacrifice a different feel to the game. You aren't going to be as wandering around as much, considering that you are locked once you enter a biome to it until you warp back to the hub. But this is when it gets a little bit nasty. And you see, the problems that Salt and Sacrifice have is that it feels like it's trying to jam another set of systems into the previous game's design, and they're just not working as well as they should. And we're going to talk about that next. But first, it's time for a quick break, and as always, if you're interested in my thoughts on design, then check out my game design books. For entry-level students, we have 20 essential games to study, and then the Game Design Deep Dive series that takes an extensive look at different genres, with free-to-play coming in 2022. When it comes to Salt and Sacrifice, similar to Elden Ring, this is a game where the major issues and imbalances really don't make themselves known until you've played through a few areas. Even though this looks very similar, obviously, to Salt and Sanctuary, Sacrifice has changed some of the underlying elements, particularly with stamina. You will go through your stamina far faster, even if you prioritize upgrading stamina on your perk tree, than you did in the first game. And this is not good considering how aggressive enemies are, the number of attacks, etc. This is not a game where you get iframes after hit. If 3 enemies hit you at the same time, those are 3 hits that are all going to connect. Many of the bosses and even minor enemies will launch projectiles at you. Some of them are homing, some of them are scatter shot, but if 1 in a group hits you, most likely the next 8 are going to hit you. And it is incredibly easy to lose a full health bar within a second in just about any major encounter. Speaking of, the boss fights, or particularly the mage fights, are very frustrating due to the design limitations of the game. Every fight takes place on a fixed plane. It is completely flat. You're not going to be having the jumps and environmental obstacles that you did with some of the boss fights in the first game. The problem is that many of the bosses will have projectile spam patterns. Every fight is random pattern, yes, but there are so few patterns that you're going to see them repeat the same attack. So if, let's say, one attack is, I'm going to spam 6 homing shots, and then they repeat it a second time, or they repeat it a third time, suddenly you are going to be in complete bullet hell mode, and if one of those shots hit, again, most likely the remaining ones will, and you're going to die. And I constantly felt that the enemy patterns were just frustrating due to the design of some of these enemies. Some patterns can attack you from behind even if they are facing the opposite direction. And as you get further into this game, it gets more and more frustrating because of it. One of the biggest tips I can give you is definitely invest in upgrading a bow or ranged weapon. Range attacks are incredibly powerful in this game, and even with the crafting limitations I'm going to talk about now, you can still use this to possibly whittle down even half of a mage's life bar relatively quick. Now, crafting, as I said in the first part, is a major point in Sacrifice, and it's also incredibly frustrating. You see, while enemies will drop random gear or random kind of artifact drops, they are procedurally generated, so most likely you're not going to get something that directly benefits you. You need to constantly grab material that is used to craft new ammunition for your ranged weapon, as well as ammunition for your quote-unquote Estus flask. And if you run out, well, guess what? You're going to be in trouble unless you go grind. And to compound matters, you can't just return to your hub or do any kind of basic crafting or things in the levels. you have to return to your hub for gear upgrades, leveling, and that completely resets all the zones. And as another very confusing issue, there are no markers, maps, or anything you can use to navigate each of the biomes. And this isn't good, because a lot of the mage doors are hidden in like random corners throughout each area. So I hope you have a really good memory if you're trying to go back to one that you saw a few sections prior. And the game just seems to kind of run out of things to fairly challenge you. Later fights are with enemies who can't be easily staggered, who have multi-hit combos, or they'll just spam projectiles or cover the arena with death that you'll have no means of actually being able to avoid. Now, we did beat this game all the way through, and it was certainly a pain. Ultimately, Salt and Sacrifice is trying to change the formula, but I feel that it's breaking things as opposed to improving. I feel the first game is overall better. I think the concept of like kind of the monster hunter tracking and hunting could work in a game, but not like this. And I would probably have it that you could fight the actual boss of them, like the actual fight, without locking the player into arena, like we do in Monster Hunter, where it becomes this chase down and smackdown throughout each zone. Here it just feels very artificial. This is one of those games where you're going to either have a very hard time fighting, or you're going to figure out the mechanics that break the game and then kind of steamroll through. And unfortunately for me, I think the first game, despite being older, felt far more, I guess, forward-thinking and unique compared to this one. So, unless you are a super huge fan, I unfortunately am going to have to give this one a pass. So with that said, I would like to thank the developer for giving me a press key to check this one out. Do all the liking, subscribing, and commenting. Check out our Discord and Patreon link down below. If you'd like me to tackle your game in a future piece, please get in touch. And come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where some of the art and science of games. Until next time, take care.